In 1920, a respected politician warned of a sinister confederacy, an alleged global Jewish plot to overthrow civilization. Just 2 years later, a prominent university leader suggested limiting the number of Jewish students at Harvard. Two different men, two shocking moments, and both would later become icons of the free world. Before we begin, remember, understanding history isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Subscribe if you value truth over comfort, and like this video if you believe knowledge is the best defense against prejudice. Let's walk calmly with open eyes through one of history's most unsettling contrasts. In the early 20th century, the world was still trembling from the shock of the First World War. Empires had fallen, revolutions had erupted, and chaos felt close enough to touch. It was an age of fear, and fear always needs a target. Winston Churchill, already known for his bold speeches and restless ambition, wrote an article in 1920 that would echo through history. The essay was called Zionism versus Bolshevism. In it, he described what he called a sinister confederacy, an alleged global network of Jewish revolutionaries working to destroy civilization. He wasn't shouting from the fringes. He was one of Britain's most recognized politicians. And in his words, Jewish revolutionaries like Trotsky and Rosa Luxemburg weren't just political radicals. They were symbols of a worldwide Jewish plot. Churchill's essay blurred the line between political analysis and prejudice. He wrote of international Jews as if they were a single, coordinated force united not by faith or heritage, but by conspiracy. For millions who read his words, the implication was clear: the unrest, the revolution, the threat to order, all of it had a face, and that face was Jewish. To be fair, Churchill wasn't driven by hatred in the way extremists were. He saw himself defending civilization from communism. But in doing so, he repeated a deadly myth, that an entire people could be judged by the actions of a few. That kind of generalization has always been the root of something darker. Ironically, just a few years later, Churchill would become a supporter of Zionism and the creation of a Jewish homeland. He praised Jewish resilience and industry. History remembers him for his courage during the Second World War, for standing against Hitler's madness. Yet the shadow of his 1920 essay lingers as a reminder. Even great men can speak dangerous words. Now, let's move to 1922, 2 years later, across the Atlantic. At Harvard University, the number of Jewish students was rising fast. By the early 1920s, Jews made up nearly a quarter of the student body. Many were children of immigrants, brilliant and determined, winning their place through hard work. But to some of Harvard's elite, that success looked like an invasion. Harvard's president, A. Lawrence Lowell, decided the university needed to act. He believed too many Jewish students would create what he called race feeling. His logic was twisted but polite. He argued that by limiting Jewish enrollment, he was actually protecting Jews from backlash. Behind the refined language was something simpler: discrimination. And on Harvard's board of overseers sat a man named Franklin D. Roosevelt. He would one day become the President of the United States, a symbol of hope during the Great Depression, and the leader who helped end World War II. But in 1922, he quietly agreed with Lowell. According to later accounts, Roosevelt thought Jewish enrollment should be reduced gradually, perhaps 1 or 2% each year, until it reached what he called a reasonable balance. He said, "You can't have a disproportionate number of any one religion." To achieve that, Harvard changed its admissions process. Instead of judging students purely on grades and merit, they began to consider character, personality, and social fit. In practice, those words became filters, subtle tools to exclude Jewish applicants without ever admitting bias outright. By the 1930s, the number of Jewish students had dropped by more than half. Harvard had maintained its polished image, soured and built a wall no one could see. Looking back, it's easy to point fingers. But there's something deeper here, something uncomfortable. These weren't ignorant men. Churchill and Roosevelt were among the most intelligent, capable, and visionary leaders of their time. Yet both, in their own ways, allowed fear and cultural prejudice to guide them. What unites their actions is a pattern as old as history itself: the urge to find balance by excluding, to protect order by blaming. Churchill feared a Jewish confederacy threatening civilization. Harvard feared a Jewish overrepresentation threatening harmony. Both turned human beings into numbers, symbols, or threats. The words were different. The meaning was the same. Fear disguised as reason. Prejudice disguised as caution. And justification disguised as wisdom. Still, it's important to remember, people change. History is full of contradictions. Churchill later became a defender of Jewish rights against Nazi tyranny. Roosevelt, for all his early biases, would lead America to fight fascism. Both in their own eras helped defeat the very hatred they once echoed. But even that doesn't erase what came before. Because prejudice, once spoken, has a long echo, it plants seeds that grow in hidden soil, in policies, in institutions, in minds. The Harvard quotas inspired similar practices at Yale, Princeton, and other universities. For decades, these character tests quietly limited opportunities for Jewish students. Some were turned away with polite letters. Others never applied, knowing the odds were stacked. Meanwhile, Churchill's 1920 essay became part of the propaganda chain that anti-Semites would later exploit. Proof: they claimed that even Britain's great statesmen saw the Jewish danger. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we acknowledge it, calmly, without defensiveness. Great leaders are not perfect. They are mirrors of their times. And sometimes those times were poisoned by fear. Second, we learn to recognize the language. Words like balance, representation, character, or influence often sound neutral. But when used to exclude, they become tools of quiet prejudice. Finally, we remember that understanding the past is not about judging it, it's about not repeating it. Every generation faces its own form of scapegoating, its own temptation to label an entire group as the problem. When we study how even the finest minds once fell for it, we gain armor, moral and mental, against letting it happen again. So, next time you hear someone warn about a group controlling this or dominating that, pause. Ask yourself, is it truth or fear dressed up as logic? Because fear always finds an enemy, and civilization always needs protectors who can tell the difference. Thank you for staying through this journey. If this story opened your eyes, share it, not to shame, but to educate. History whispers to those who listen carefully, and it's only by listening that we can make sure its darker echoes never become tomorrow's reality.